Shirazeh was born in Iran in 1955 and moved to London in 1974. She was awarded the title Professor at the London Institute and was shortlisted for the Turner Prize at the Tate Gallery in 1994 and awarded the Asia Arts Game Changer Award Hong Kong 2018. Her major projects and commissions include Rice Public Art, Moody Center for Arts Houston, East Window, St. Martin in the Fields London, Sydney Biennale, Australia, Kiev Biennale, Ukraine, Camden Arts Centre, London, Breath at the Tour de Porta Nua, 55th Venice Biennale, Tate Liverpool, Villa Stuck Munich, so on and so forth. Bharti Kher's art gives form to quotidian life and its daily rituals in a way that reassesses and transforms their meaning with her own personal language of alchemy and mythology. Among Kher's signature materials, loaded with symbolism, is the bindi, which first appeared in her work in 1995. Kher's recent solo exhibitions include Alchemies, Yorkshire Sculpture Park, UK 2024, Bharti Kher Anorfini, Bristol, UK, A Consummate Joy, Irish Museum of Modern Art in 2020. Her works are in various global collections like the Tate and the British Museum UK and the National Museum of Canada, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, among others. For Pushpamala N, in her strongly feminist and subversive practice as a photo and video artist, sculptor, performer, writer, and curator, she seeks to intervene in the dominant cultural and intellectual discourse. Her work is often polemical, looking at the idea of the nation-state in an age of globalized neoliberalism, and using the idea of cultural memory to explore history and contemporary society with irony and wit. Professor Dr. Thomas Girst, he's the global head of the BMW Group Cultural Engagement and is an award-winning cultural manager, journalist, and author. Formerly the head of Art Science Research Laboratory in New York. His most recent books include the Duchamp Dictionary, 100 Secrets of the Art World, which I have read many times over, and it has saved me in many ways, and Esther Malangu, A Life in Color, with Azu Nwakbogu and Hans Ulrich Obrist. His Cultural Management, A Global Guide, will be published with Thames and Hudson in 2025, and I will be consuming that book. I now hand it over to Dr. Thomas to take it forward, and it's just a push click at the end. You can also take. Would you like mine, Thomas? Thomas, go ahead.
Hello.
Shaleen, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. It was really amazing that we can sit here, and the way that you prepared us for this talk is really beyond compare. So I'm very grateful. On the side of BMW, of course, we are partners of the fair. We have been for almost 10 years now. And we are a luxury brand, but at the end of the day, with 50 years of cultural engagement and hundreds of initiatives worldwide, we don't want to end up on the shallow bling-bling side of things, but really ideally create meaning, make the onlooker, the viewer, those that are attending this talk, go home with something to think about and maybe have their thoughts opened up by new perspectives. And I'm just very thrilled to be here with the three of you and to be spending some time with you and trying to delve into your brain and your practice. And so without further ado, I would just love to start with a question that came to my mind when Shaleen gave us the title for this talk, speaking about introspection and speaking about impact, from introspection to impact. I would think that introspection is something that happens in your studio, that happens in your creative practice, when you take your time, when you think things through. And impact is, of course, what is happening when you are attending your own openings, when you are putting together a show, when you are having a museum presentation. It was Marcel Duchamp. Oh, it's off to a good start, the microphone. So we can just hand that around. It was Marcel Duchamp in the 1960s who spoke about the solitary explosion of artists facing themselves alone in the studio. So we have the solitary explosion of artists facing themselves alone in the studio vis-a-vis their public persona. We spoke about that more than 60 years ago. And I'm wondering, you've all reached that point in your careers. You have shown worldwide. You have lived in many countries. You have explored even more. you are known by more people than you know people. So that's how I would define also an established artist. So you have passed that basically. So my question to you, and I'm going to start with you, Pushpamala, is can you talk to me about how that moment of introspection or this time of introspection differs from this time of making an impact? Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. First of all, I think it's a very romantic idea that of this artist working alone in the studio, because many times many artists are part of collectives. We also like to work with other people around us. Many artists work, with assistants and or in group studios with public studios. We do need introspection, and introspection can come in actually researching, in the form of researching, not necessarily thinking like the thinker, but in that kind of research, the background for our work, reading, researching, collecting material, sometimes even talking to friends, discussing things with friends and other people. And I think in earlier days, people always worked in ateliers, artists. It's only quite, with modernism or like from the 19th century Europe, that this whole idea of the artist working alone in the studio has come up. But in another way, when you're talking about the public, I don't think we actually work thinking about the public when we are making it, because that destroys the work. You need that kind of quietude to work. But for myself, I think I'm interested in intervening in different ways into the discourse. So I work in different materials and also different forms. Like, for example, I make art, but I also write, I curate, I organize. So I want to be present everywhere, making my interventions into the thinking of the times.
Okay, I think mine works. I'm a studio-based artist, and I always have been. So the studio is my center, and it's the place that I go every day. I also work with a team. Many of them have been with me for over 15 years. And so I feel that within the studio space, for me, it's a very private space. And it's really, as a maker, it's someone who makes sculpture and who makes all of their work in the studio. There's a kind of, I always think that there's a 0-point continuum of creativity, which is this point between fear and courage. And I find that in my studio, there's the thing that if I'm unsure of what I'm doing, I kind of take it as a really good sign that the work is being pushed somewhere that I haven't been before. The practicalities of just working within the studio is also, something that I enjoy hugely. And so there is that part of me as a person that doesn't come out maybe in the public sphere of sort of being very playful in the studio space. I have a different personality when I'm in my studio. And when I'm outside, you've become the artist who has to talk much more, maybe rigorously, more conceptually about where the work is coming from. But the studio is the space of innocence. It can be childlike. It's playful. It's also, there's a naivety there because you don't really know where you're going. You allow yourself to make mistake after mistake after mistake until you arrive at where you want to arrive. So there are two worlds that exist, or certainly within, for myself, and I only speak for myself. It is the private and the public.
With Pushpamala, I understand with your answer, and because you're very collaborative. You work with writers. You're yourself a writer. You work with theater producers and everything. And you make us very curious visiting your studio, seeing the childlike Bharti Kher failing, or the studio is your center, as you say. I'm interested, Shirazeh, in what you have to say in terms of studio vis-a-vis public persona.
Well, for me, I'm a very solitary person on the whole, and I enjoy working on my own because making art for me has always been about cultivating the self. And like a farmer, when you cultivate, you want to concentrate on what you're doing. That is very profound. You cannot really share that. I also work with other people. I mean, I do large projects. Sometimes I'm working with at the moment I'm doing a big, huge project, which is a court facade of a court building, for example. So I have to work with hundreds of people, architects, people who are, and that is another way of working. But my development is really in those solitary moments. I think the solitary moment, it's the time when you can experience. You cannot experience if you have got a room full of people. It just takes away something because you're always performing. But when you're on the company of just by yourself, and in ancient times, artists did that. I mean, for example, in China, Chinese intellectual artists, they would travel into the mountain to be on their own, to be able to reflect, to be able to think. And making art was not about just impact. This really comes next. They don't even think about it. Making art was about cultivating the self. And today we very often think about impact more than what it means to be an artist and how you cultivate the self, how you make yourself grow. Because if you don't grow, how can you give anything to the world?
Thank you. What we're seeing here in the back, I didn't say that in the beginning, all artists on stage shows about 20 images that are running in a loop. So you see those coming up one after the other with the name of the artist in between so you know whose work is which. You made a remark about ancient history, and I want to delve into that. There's a joke that is a cartoon in the New Yorker that I very often refer to. It's about two planets meeting. One of those planets is planet Earth. And the other planet that is not planet Earth turns to planet Earth and says, "What's wrong with you? You look sick." And planet Earth goes, "I got Homo sapiens." And the other planet, that's already a good joke, but the other planet goes, "Don't worry, it'll go away." So the thing is this, I mean, we live in times of bashing our heads in, you know, and we see all the ugliness that human beings can do to each other. I always feel that working in the arts, whether that be political or aesthetic or working with chance, you contribute to something that human beings are also capable of. You contribute to something that is beautiful, maybe not aesthetically pleasing, but that sets off a thought process of its own. And I wonder if you think about that joke, and we will be here if we want to, if we can, until this Earth implodes into the sun. We got 5 billion years to go. Homo sapiens has been around for 100,000 years or a little longer? So the thing is, how do you see your contribution? Or how would you like to see your contribution? What are you tapping into in your own art that you think contributes to adding beauty? No matter, beauty can also create disputes to this world. What are you after? Bharti, let's start with you.
Okay. Okay, so I think it is our human hubris, isn't it, to think that we are the most intelligent species here, and at the same time, it's a kind of Western Aristotle philosophy that rationality somehow the human race must understand everything through science because everything must be proved. But indigenous societies and certainly ancient societies, even spiritual practitioners, have always known that everything in the universe is connected and that animals communicate, the water, the sea, everything around you. There is energy in the world. And I think in my work, certainly, there is a very strong element of that. It is the essence. It's why I do casting. When I cast the body of a human or a woman or somebody that I know, what I'm trying to do is alchemize a material such as plaster. Plaster sort of seeps into the skin. Plaster seeps into the skin, and it pulls out the essence of the body. these are all, these things, like when you can capture them or when you can catch something like that in an object, you are allowing the object to be, there's a kind of what they call animism, I suppose, where the object itself becomes alive. And the earth is everything, we are all connected. The earth is connected. Every single animate and inanimate objects is connected. And I think, certainly in my work, it's something, when I collect objects or when I put things together, what I'm trying to do is kind of create a fusion of energy that somehow creates a synthesis or a space of sort of implosion. And you kind of see it in the back there. But
that's your show in Yorkshire at the moment. It's called Alchemy, right? It's your sculptures in
that show
Yorkshire up until
in
April.
Yorkshire Sculpture Park is called Alchemies.
Why is it called that?
Because I think that over the years, the way that I use material is almost like an alchemist. What I'm interested in doing is putting things together and asking materials to have the potential to be more than themselves. And when I maybe make casts of things like, especially like I talked about the body, I'm going back to the human body again and again and again, because I want to believe and I want to put into the work that we have so much more potential. There is so much more than the single axis of the way that we see ourselves, or we are so much more than just the sum of our parts. And perception is a really important part in the way of how you make work, of how you push the work to become something else.
Saw these pictures from your show in Yorkshire. I think it's up until Yorkshire Gardens, rather. It's up until April this year.
Yeah.
How does it feel getting into the ring with nature, especially in terms of what you said before?
I mean, you don't compete with nature ever. You present yourself to nature, and you ask nature to be kind to your work, because there's no competition. I mean, I think you can make work. There are some images later just showing of the outdoor works. And I suppose what I'm trying to do is make work for specific spaces that can somehow either, I'm not even challenging it, I'm just placing it and looking at the way that, say, a human form can contend with, like a ancestor, for example, was in front of an ash tree that's over 350 years old. You know, how do I compete with an ash tree that has seen and watched everything?
Shirazeh, what's going back to the initial question? What would you like your impact to be? What are you going after?
Well, for me, actually, as I said, because my work is really about cultivating myself, breath became very important to me. Because if you don't breathe, you're no more. You know, the atoms of my body was made in the stars. So the breath animates my existence. So I realized that actually, if there is a point of connection with the universe, because I want to invite cosmos inside myself, I don't want to see the separation between the world out there and inside. So for that reason, I started to work with breath. And what is very fascinating about breath for me, right now we are all sitting in this room. You have no idea that we are actually sharing more than we know. Because the same air that I'm breathing is traveling inside your lung. In fact, we are so connected.
We're talking past COVID, by the way, so it's fine. Go ahead.
That is exactly what we realize in the time of COVID, how connected we are. And that interconnectedness, I discovered that by working through breath. And I have made lots of works, which is, like this one at the back, which was shown at the Venice Biennale in 2013. I choreographed the breath of 4 vocalists. And from 4 different traditions. There was Islamic, there is Jewish, there is Christian, there is Buddhist. And you went inside this black felt, and then you stood in the middle. The black felt from outside was containing it was like the culture is in the lung. So you stood in the middle of this room, and you couldn't really distinguish between the different breaths. And also I started measuring the breath of, for example, different culture through prayer. Because there is such a the distance, the rhythm that is created in different culture. Like, for example, what I discovered in Islamic culture, it's like earth. everything is regulated in the breath. And then I discovered in the Christian culture, it was like a mercury. Everything was transient and very aerial. So each breath was really representing, and we need all of them. And I realized that how we are connected to something we might call culture, we might call art, but actually we are really connected to our being embodied, to this body and this breath. So breath became my subject in some ways, and I wanted to really show how interconnected we are. And, this is something very powerful, and we are alive because we have this interconnectedness. We shouldn't separate. Unfortunately, the conscious mind wants to separate itself from the others. That's what we usually do. So we draw a boundary around ourselves. We say, I am from this culture. I have this name. I have this tradition. And you separate yourself from the others. But we never really look at the roots. We are breathing the same air. We are living on this from the same earth and the same energy from the sky. So we are so connected. And we only see the separation that we have created intellectually. And there is no reality, or they've got no basis, that separation whatsoever.
You talk about the interconnectedness, and you said in the right here that the whole planet was your country, and you said you want to invite the universe into your body. Is it sometimes, when we look at works like this, I think what draws the viewer into your work is also that it's hard to tell whether you're on a microscopic or on a macroscopic level. Is that what your art is going for?
Yes, because scale is everything.
Yeah.
I mean, if you imagine, there are millions of scale. So our perception is limited to our body. I'm seeing the world through my two eyes. I don't have 360-degree eyes around me. Some creatures do. Some others, insects especially, or I think there is a kind of prawn in the sea where it's got millions of eyes. So can you imagine what the perception would be like? What would you see the world? So we have a limited perception, and we think we know the truth. And all I'm saying is reality is not reachable by just one scale. You have to have ability to have many scales. You have to have ability to see the very small. And this is what it makes me very interested in science. Because today's science look at the atomic world, the particles, which are very small. And it behaves in a particular way. And then they look at this massive scale, which is the stars and the cosmos. And then they have a different phenomena. And these two things, they can't come together in our mind because we are limited. We have only one scale to understand the world. And I'm suggesting that because we don't know, we have to learn to say we are limited first before we... And unfortunately, this is not the case. Not in politics, not in the way we even observe ourselves. We think we know. The arrogance that we have. We think we even understand better than animals, better than... this universe is much bigger than the little scale I have.
Traveling from the universe to Kathmandu in Nepal is Pushpamala, because we're still on the second question here. In Nepal, you're having a group show. I think it's called Feminist Futures, Art and Activism and South Asian Womanhood. It's up until, I think, next year. And I wanted to ask you, the title speaks for your impact in terms of what your art can do. But tell me, in regard to the question that I asked, in terms of the contribution that you think your art is making.
I think from the very beginning, my work is quite strongly social and political. Sometimes it doesn't seem so because I like to have a very light touch. So I use a lot of humor and wit and irony, and it's not heavy-handed. I try not to make it heavy-handed and not necessarily direct all the time. Sometimes it is direct, though. And so I think at a very early age, as a teenager, I decided to be, or I was a feminist. And this was in the 70s, and we were reading, feminist literature. So by the time I went to Baroda, I was a feminist. And I actually started working with certain materials and certain subjects from the very beginning, which were sort of feminist. So it's So as an artist, I'm interested in trying to understand our world by looking at history and memory. And I'm very interested particularly in the 19th century and the colonial disciplines, which I've used a lot in my work, like anthropology, anthropometry, now recently epigraphy, and so on. I'm getting interested in other subjects as well. But it's not nostalgia, neither would I call it post-colonial, because sometimes my work is described as post-colonial. But actually I'm looking at the present and how some of these ideas, which are actually very unjust, and dividing people into the center and the margins, are being used today not only in our understanding of the way things are run, but also in the way governments are running the countries, So one of the things I keep looking at is the idea of citizenship and the woman as citizen and the woman and the nation, the idea of the nation as well.
You said this morning, because it's like those are big subject matters that you tackle, especially through the centuries and picking up on the 19th century. When we spoke this morning, you said that you're facing a crisis every day in your work, like working in a studio. I think you're moving to a new studio. You just have a new book out. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. What you meant by that, going through a crisis every day? Is that really an inspiring process?
No, I'm just building a new studio, so it's maddening. So my architect is sitting here, so I can't speak too much about it. So, this, I don't know, I think, as Bharti said, whenever we start something, we're very unsure. And I think, again, like her, I feel like, I feel validated when I'm unsure about something, because I know I'm going into some kind of new territory and I'm pushing myself and so on. So that way, in fact, somebody, a psychoanalyst, psychotherapist I knew, he said, you artists are so embarrassed by your work. I think we sort of cringe and say, is this really is this stupid, or does it work, or is it profound, or what? We don't know. And that's where the public comes in, because I think that validation comes when actually people see the work and they sort of respond. Sometimes you just don't know. Maybe it's all rubbish, So, as I said, I like to sort of intervene in the world. That's the word I use, in different ways. So recently, just yesterday, a book I've been co-editing with an academic friend has just been released. So these are paper. This echo is very irritating, actually. Sorry. So this book is actually a collection of essays, which are from an international seminar that I organized in 2016 about the figure of this early 20th century modernist artist from my state called Kher Venkatappa. So he's not seen as a great artist or anything, but he's important because he's the first modern artist from my state. So he's like an ancestor for us. So I always, for the last 20 years, I've been thinking of writing on him or doing something about him, because what happens is that I think in the south of we people who are away from the centers like Delhi and Bombay, we always complain that nobody writes about us, or we don't have enough history or enough material like documentation, but we should do it. So one of the things I am trying to do is do a lot of things like and engage with this, our own histories and our own, our own histories. And another interesting thing about the seminar was that in 1996, when I moved to Bangalore, which is my hometown, I sort of created this fictional institution called Somberi Katte. So Somberi Katte means idler's platform. So it's actually that platform around a big tree which you find in villages and towns in India. So it's like a kind of adda place where people gather to gossip or to discuss things. And so I've been organizing for the last, since 96, I've been organizing many things, shows and, having seminars in my studio, organizing series of talks and so on. So 2016 was the 20th year of Somberi Katte. So to celebrate that, I had this seminar. Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know what else to say, but yeah, so I'm hoping that it's actually, the book is very interesting because about 12 to 14, I've also written an essay on it, but most of the people are academics. And so it's like Rashomon, it's like all these essays around this figure who's like a kind of absence almost, because he's not really known, and though he copiously wrote diaries, those diaries don't contain much information. So we are going round and round and round this figure. So we hope it'll be a path-breaking book. Yeah, and not only in the South or in Karnataka, but in terms of how, books can be written or artists can be discussed.
Thank you. You mentioned the book, and you mentioned Bangalore, where of course much of your artistic practice is happening. Until recently, there was always the term Global South, which didn't really go anywhere, because if you compare it to the North, it didn't really make sense in terms of how you used the terminology Global South when it came to geography. Charlene was kind enough to talk about the global majority, meaning 80% is indigenous, Latin American, African, Asian, vis-a-vis the global North. And Shirazeh, you left Iran at the age of 18. Bharti, you were born in London, and I think you came back at the age of 25 or 24 to India. My question is, in this discussion about the global majority vis-a-vis the global North, I mean, you mentioned that everywhere is your country and the planet is, but where do you position yourself, or do you feel the need to position yourself within your art in terms of maybe the mythologies you delve into, in terms of what it is you want the viewer to take away from your art? Bharti.
Okay. These are really big issues. I mean, I remember when I first came to India, I was 22, and I started working when I was about 25, and it was strange because nobody could really understand why I would come from London and sort of particularly come back to Delhi to start working here as an artist, and it was almost like a reverse. So somebody actually said to me, "You're a reverse diaspora." And I was just like, well, what does that mean? Because I think everyone has this very inane desire to place you, to label you in a way that's convenient for them to understand in some ways. And I'm kind of I'm in your team. I mean, I'm from everywhere, and I am as curious about Islamic culture as I am about Indian culture. I'm as curious about Chinese or Tibetan as I am about German, if I'm somewhere. Whenever I go to a space or wherever I work, I will always try and sense or spend time in a place, try and connect with a narrative or find a kind of story that I can catch, so that there's a kind of authenticity to the way that I respond to the place. But I don't look at space and place in the same way. I think there's a very subtle but very strong difference in the way that you understand where you're from. And I look at myself more in a sense of space. And that's a very broad place, so I can connect wherever I feel. And some of the works that I make, especially the balance pieces or the equilibrium works where I place certain points of contact, I make those physical arcs for myself in different exhibitions so I can connect them and I can connect myself. I mean, the way that we all travel now is just, we move and we are interconnected. Our cultures are connected. So what was your question? Sorry.
I think you already answered it in terms of place versus vis-a-vis space, and how you don't want to be restrained by place, but rather explore space.
Yeah.
Pushpamala, how does that work for you?
I don't know what exactly you mean, but I'll tell you one thing. Mine is a slightly different story, because I made a conscious decision to go back to Bangalore, which is my hometown, which I left when I was 20 years old, and I vowed never to go back, because I had all these hundreds of relatives who were spying on me and reporting to my parents and so on. So I just wanted to get away and be free and be somewhere else. But for various reasons, I made a sort of decision because I think I wanted to make a studio there. I was living in Bombay and I couldn't really work. I didn't have space to work and all that, so I decided to move back. But it was also like the way I connect, in a sense, I can be both an insider and outsider in Bangalore, in my state. Because in India, every state has a different language and a culture, or several languages, in fact. So they're like countries, their own histories. So I think the way I can connect to, say, whether history or the contemporary in my state through the language and the fact that I am from there is actually very interesting, because I can't do that in other places, even in India, which can also be liberating. But the funny thing is I'm seen as an outsider in Bangalore because I look different, or I do whatever I feel like. But I like that, for example, I'm seen as a kind of Karnataka cultural figure, for instance. And I connect to, say, literary people or filmmakers from there. And they say, you're one of our own kind of thing, which is actually an interesting thing for me as well, because it's a kind of belonging. But also I'm not really in that provincial or parochial way. I'm not, I don't feel parochial or or provincial. I mean, I'm not provincial. I'm very cosmopolitan, and I travel everywhere, and I can get along in most places. I'm quite comfortable and so on. So I don't know. Sometimes, I think this thing that one is a freewheeling figure is also like, I don't know if it's true, because I think location matters to me in the sense that what stories you take from there and what you connect to. And of course, you're always critiquing it. Yeah.
Shirazeh, this place of belonging and living, how does that resonate with you, and how does that inform your practice?
I understand we all seek identity, and the center of identity for us is very crucial as a human race. But also, this is actually one of our problems. This is one of the biggest problems we are facing. I mean, if you think Keats, as an English poet, John Keats, one of the things he said, which is very profound, he said, a poet has no identity because when he walks into the room, he wants to be that empty space where others could come in. If you are full, if you know who you are, if you have that complete sureness of your identity and your place, you have no space for anybody else, no other creatures, nothing. So a poet has to be hollow, empty of self. This is so important to me. And I think one of the things I wanted to say is that Shelley was another English poet, which I think is very powerful. He communed with a skylark. I will tell you about the skylark. You probably know about skylark. Skylark is a bird that hovers in the air. As it hovers, it will sing. And the song is very beautiful. If you ever had a chance to listen to skylark, you will know what I mean. So Shelley says, please teach me half of the gladness that thy brain knows. I mean, I'm reading it now. I better not ruin Shelley's poem. I think this is very important because he is teaching us that one of the problems is here. He says, teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know. Such a harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then, as I am listening now. Why he's saying that? Because he feels the skylark is free. It's that aerial imagination. It doesn't have a place on this planet. I feel like the skylark. My being is aerial. I don't have that, what you're all talking about, which is a place, which is a boundary, which is like, I'm Indian, I'm Persian, I'm English, I'm French. I have none of that. So how am I going to express? I am the skylark. That's what I want to be.
in Tibetan culture, and I've made this. There's the skywalker. It's the woman who walks in the sky. She's called the Dakini, and she is this all-powerful female figure who is. She's always naked. She's always exposed. She's extremely powerful. Her sexual energy is out there. Really, really, she's wonderful. And I've made a Dakini, and I called that work the Cloud Walker. And I think some of the works that I make, especially the female figures, they come from this place where the self is multiple. And, you know, I take a lot from mythology. And I take a lot not just from Indian mythology, but from Persian, from Greek, from even Celtic. And a lot of the female figures, I mean, we have this amazing figure in India. It's called the Ardhanavishvara, which is the half man, half woman. And it's just, it's so simple that we constantly, like you said, we label ourselves as, you know, especially, and increasingly more in this age, where we identify with a certain type. But what they were saying so many generations, thousands and thousands of years ago, is that we are multiple. And all of us are half man and half woman. We are all masculine and feminine. We are all animal and spirit. We are all earth and fire. We are all water and air. You know, it's just, this is the nature of the way that we are as living, breathing beings. And it's something that I tap into a lot, and I manifest it in the way I use the body. You work in this beautiful abstract way, and you connect with the matters of the spirit. That's how I see your work. Yeah. And I do it with the body.
Yeah, it's not just abstract, actually. I mean, I'm very fascinated with, like, for example, biological system, the cell. Yeah. We are now sitting in this room. Our cells are now active in our body. There are millions of cells is making me alive and, you know, working there. But unfortunately, we are so much stuck on our brain and consciousness that we are not even aware that we have a cell in our body and what the cell is doing in our body. And if you study the cell, what you just said about we are both male and female, the cells has transcend survival of life on earth is to be able to transcend duality. That is the basic survival mechanism of a living system. The cell is both open and closed. It's closed because it has to protect itself, so it has got a membrane, and it's open because the food has to go in and out. It's very simple. This is nature. And what is very beautiful about natural world is actually in its essence, we call it abstract, but in fact, it is nature. It is the system that keeps us alive. And if we really concentrate on that, and try to really bring that into our lives and to become aware of it, that the cell, for example, has got the same DNA, the same structure as my liver cell, as my brain cell. But each one are exactly identical, yet they're all different. For example, the cell of the liver cannot become a cell of the brain. They're all different. They're all different and the same. So this is really at the heart of the story. Unfortunately, all of us, we come from a culture of duality. Dualistic perception is part of who we are. And this is the problem. And I have been searching on this planet for one culture that doesn't have this problem. And I found it, and that was ancient China. The Taoist, what we call the Taoist or the Taoist, they were people who actually didn't have this concept of black and white as two opposite things. Inside, I mean, I have made a work here, which is called the allegory of sight. And it's about a light and shadow. The light said to the shadow, if I wasn't there, you wouldn't exist. And the shadow turns back and says, if I wasn't there, you would never find yourself. This is at the heart of the story. So she's right. We all have yin and yang. We all have this duality inside us. And this is what keeps the universe working. And why we are dividing, why constantly we say we belong to this, we are that. We are not. We are all.
Shirazeh, this is already a beautiful song of the Skylark. Thank you, that we can listen to more. Walt Whitman also said in the 19th century, I am large, I contain multitudes, right? It wasn't so much about the duality of things, but that we can be many people. And delving into the mythologies as you describe them, or into biology, is something that kind of pushes that a little further than us thinking in these little compartments. We have just a few minutes left. There's a big question I want to ask you, especially when I look at the audience at the very end. But one more maybe, because one thing that unites you all, I mean, now you're talking about your creative process and the introspection side of things. When it comes to impact, it is about the material you use. It is about the medium you choose to work in. And one thing that connects all of your focal points in terms of your creative process is working in sculpture. Now, I'm certainly generalizing, and I might be completely wrong, so I want you to tell me, is that I find that the generation before you, and I think somebody said that we're all standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of what it is that we do, because there's many that have become before us and many that have fought the right fight for us to be able to do what it is that we're doing, is that you all three work in sculpture. And I think that the generation before was more working, like women artists before were working in painting and in watercolor because it was easier accessible and easier to do than working in sculpture, which is to a certain degree associated with just the material alone and the creative process that is a rather manly thing. But now you can slaughter me alive or prove me wrong. So I wonder that all of you tackling sculpture and having worked in sculpture, is that ever something that occurred to your mind that you're intruding on male territory, or is that just bullshit?
No, absolutely. It's very, very male. I remember when I entered the sculpture department, when I decided to take up sculpture, I was like a kind of 40-kilo weakling, And so I was very nervous about taking up sculpture because I thought you had to be huge and muscular and they had to carve. It needs skill actually more than strength to carve stone or whatever, weld and so on. So it was very much about these classical materials and so on at that point, and making huge abstract sculptures. Like Henry Moore was very sort of, But when I was a sculpture student, I was trying to find models, to look up to. And there's some very fine sculptors, like, for example, Meera Mukherjee, who was in Calcutta. And she worked with the tribal people over there and used their technique to make modern sculpture. Marvelous. In fact, I've seen quite a lot of her work. I was lucky to see a huge solo show of hers. And then there was closer to home was Mrinalini Mukherjee, who was working with fiber, macrame actually, and making these huge, wonderful sort of sculptures. So they were like, and of course there were other artists like Neelima Sheikh, who was doing painting, or Nasreen Mohammadi, who was doing, ink and pencil drawings, but very influential on all of us, with her kind of asceticism and her aestheticism as well, and that kind of purity of her practice. So there were some very important, I think these two I mentioned, like Meera Mukherjee and Mrinalini Mukherjee, were, I think, much better than all the other male sculptors. I mean, they were kind of really, pioneers of their time and very cutting edge compared to most of the work that was going on, which was very conventional and also commercial.
Okay, so sculpture. I learned to make sculpture in India, really, and I was trained as a painter. And the reason I suppose I didn't make sculpture at college is because I found it a little bit intimidating. And that was more about me, actually, than it was about the workshops. But at the same time, I was looking at Hepworth and Barbara Hepworth, and we had the fantastic Louise Bourgeois, who has always been a very huge figure in my life as an artist. So it wasn't something that I thought, no, I can't do this. I thought, it's a material, and the material is not the message. That's what I've always sort of reminded myself through my career. What you're doing with the material is taking you and the work on a journey. If you need to know and if you need to understand a material, you just learn about it. And that's it. And then you work with people and you ask people, you go and you look for help. You work with teams who can do things that are better than you, and you learn from them. And it's about collaborating. It's about learning to build teams sometimes. It's also about the limitations of a particular material. But I find all of that really, that's the great part for me. So I've never found it challenging. In fact, it's just been a learning for me the whole way.
Well, I think I found the question really a cliche, sorry. Because, I mean, we were talking about inside me is as much male as there is a female. So I don't know how to answer that. I mean, you know, sculpture is a male. I don't believe that. I think many women have made sculpture even before. You know, they did pottery, they built building. I mean, we don't know what the early man did when they were hunter-gatherer and in the Neolithic time. We don't know how many women built things. And I mean, these cliché, I think, is cultural cliché. It's not reality. I mean, women will have done these things as well. And sadly, you know, we still carry cliché what a woman can do and what a man can do. And how many women architects we have. I mean, you wouldn't think that women can build building, probably. But, you know, we have some fantastic women architects. So these are all cliché, actually. So I don't know what to answer. So for me, doing sculpture, it came because I was interested to see how can something which is concrete, because sculpture is material word, it's concrete, and how can I transform this concrete reality to something that is ethereal and aerial? This is what it made me to become involved with the sculpture. It's a challenge, that transformation.
Shirazeh, thank you for calling out my cliché. I'm very happy. I live and I learn from... but I put in a disclaimer and a preemptive strike in my question, if you remember that. Bharti and Pushpamala, very grateful for all of your answers and the depth with which you answered my inquiries. Final question, especially for those in the audience that are young, that are thinking about an artistic career. If you were to meet your 20, 25-year-old self, like really, you meet the Shirazeh, you meet yourself and Bharti, 20, 25 years, and you're venturing out, you're becoming an artist. What would your advice be to yourself, or what would you tell a young artist, knowing what you know now? Let's start with Pushpamala.
Well, I think one of the things that when I was young and with young artists is that we work very little because we are so intimidated by the material, by a lack of experience and all that, and we never finish anything. So what I tell people, and I would, is about, just don't think too much and make a lot of work. The quantity matters because you start sort of getting experience with that material and how to sort of express yourself. So, and then you can edit. And don't be so fearful. It doesn't matter. You don't have to show anyone that work, and you can keep it away. So you need to produce a lot of work.
I suppose get a room, get a studio, go out every day. That's not your house. And it's a scholarship, making art. It's a discipline. It's not just that you just think, okay, I feel like going to work. It's something that you do every day. So go to work every day, even when you don't feel like it. And don't be a baby about it. And just you've got to go to work. You've got to just put in the hours and then make loads of shit art. Just make loads of it, and it's fine. And the thing is, you make lots of bad work and then you just make work over it, and you make mistakes and learn to love them and be proud of them. And I think I would tell myself, my 25-year-old self, no regrets. Really, just don't be so hard on yourself all the time.
Well, I think for me, the best thing is to be open. Openness, ultimately, is the only way we can learn. There's a beautiful poem by Basho the Japanese poet. He says, if you want to learn about pine tree, go to the pine. If you want to learn about the bamboo, go to the bamboo. Don't sit down and worry about your own thought and motivation, because you will never get anywhere. Just go to what you have to do. And that requires an openness.
Be open. Now we ran through 10, 20 mics. I think we're pretty much done here. But thank you so much. So be open and create lots and lots of work. And I think that does not only go for the artistic profession, but for all of us. So I thank Shirazeh, I thank Bharti, I thank Pushpamala. Thank you so much for your time, for your devotion to the subject matter. And to Shalene, of course, a big thank you for making this all happen. And thank you to the audience. We skipped the Q&A because we're pretty much still doing good in time when it comes to all of the talks that came before and after. But these three amazing artists will be with us. So if you have questions, then just rush up and throw them at them. Yeah? Thank you. Thank you very much.